Two twins invest the exact same amount every month, $300 at the same rate of return. One of them ends up with $421,000, and the other ends up with $365,000. The twin with more money only invested for 10 years, while the twin with less kept investing for 30. That's not a typo. 1/3 the time, 1/3 the money, and 15% more wealth at the finish line. The entire explanation comes down to a single concept called compound interest. Compound interest means earning interest on your interest. You put money somewhere, it grows. That growth gets added to your pile, and then your bigger pile grows even more. Picture a snowball rolling downhill, picking up more snow the larger it gets. Warren Buffett described it this way at his company's 1999 shareholder meeting. The nature of compound interest is it behaves like a snowball of sticky snow. And the trick is to have a very long hill, which means either starting very young or living to be very old. This video breaks down exactly how compound interest works, with the actual math, the specific dollar amounts, and the reason the gap between starting now and starting later is so much wider than most people realize. We're also going to flip it around and show you how this same force attacks you when you're in debt, because compound interest doesn't care whose side it's on. Let's get into the numbers. 3 people each decide to invest $300 a month and earn a 7% average annual return. That 7% figure isn't made up. The S&P 5 has returned roughly 7% per year after inflation over the last century, according to data maintained by a finance professor at a major university, and we'll come back to that number later. The only difference between these 3 people is when they start. Person 1 begins at 25, person 2 at 35, and person 3 at 45. All 3 stop at 65. Here's what happens to person 1. 40 years of investing, a total of $144,000, contributed out of pocket, and at 65 their account holds $787,000. Over $643,000 of that balance is pure interest. Money they never earned at a job. Money their money generated on its own. Person 2 invests for 30 years, contributes $108,000 and ends up with $365,000, about $258,000 of it coming from interest. 20 years of investing is all person 3 manages, contributing $72,000 and ending up with $156,000, where $84,000 comes from interest. Put those side by side and the differences are staggering. Starting at 25 means you contribute $144,000 and walk away with $787,000, where 82% of your final balance is interest you never contributed. Starting at 35 means $108,000 and gets you $365,000 out, with 71% being interest. And starting at 45 means $72,000 in and $156,000 out, with only 54% coming from interest. The person who started at 25 contributed only $36,000 more than the person who started at 35. But here's the thing, they ended up $421,000 richer. That extra $36,000 generated over $400,000 in additional wealth. Not because they were smarter, not because they picked better investments, but because they started 10 years earlier. And that brings us back to the twins. Twin A invests $300 a month from age 25 to 35, just 10 years, and then stops completely, never putting in another dollar, just letting the money sit and grow. Twin B waits until 35 and then invests $300 a month every single month for 30 years straight, all the way to 65. $36,000 is everything Twin A ever contributed. Twin B put in $108,000, 3 times as much money over 3 times as many years. Twin A still wins. $421,000 versus $365,000. Twin A comes out ahead by over $55,000 despite investing $72,000 less. That's the raw force of compound interest combined with time. The early money had 30 extra years to compound, and no amount of later contributions could close that gap. Every dollar invested at age 25 turns into roughly $11.70 by 65 at 7%, while every dollar invested at 45 grows to only $3.40. Starting early effectively triples the power of every single dollar you put in. A mental shortcut exists that makes compound interest intuitive, and it's been around for over 500 years. People call it the rule of 72, and it works like this. You divide 72 by your interest rate, and the answer tells you approximately how many years your money needs to double. Earning 4% means your money doubles in about 18 years. 6% cuts that to 12 years. 8% brings it down to 9. And 10% means a doubling roughly every 7 years. That last number lands hard when you play it forward. $1,000 becomes $2,000, which becomes $4,000, then $8,000, then $16,000. 4 doublings in about 28 years, and you never added a single cent. An Italian mathematician named Luca Pacioli first wrote this rule down in 1494 in a book called Summa de Arithmetica. His words, translated from Italian, were, in wanting to know for any capital, at a given yearly percentage, in how many years it will be doubled, keep as a rule the number 72 in mind. Pacioli never claimed to invent it, presenting it instead as something already well known among Italian merchants, which means this shortcut has been in use for at least 530 years. The accuracy is striking. At 8%, the rule of 72 predicts 9 years, and the exact mathematical answer is 9.01 years, almost perfect. Between about 2 and 15%, the rule covers basically every interest rate a normal person encounters with barely any error. You can also run the rule of 72 in reverse to see how compounding works against you. 3% inflation means 72 divided by 3, which gives you 24 years for the cash sitting in your drawer to lose half its value. Compounding builds wealth when it's on your side, and it quietly destroys purchasing power when it's not. Seeing what happens without compound interest helps explain why it matters so much. Simple interest means you only earn interest on your original amount, nothing more. $10,000 at 5% simple interest earns you $500 every single year, which means after 10 years you have $15,000, after 20 you have $20,000, and after 30 you reach $25,000. Growth follows a straight line, the same $500 added year after year, forever. Compound interest starts the same way, with $500 in year 1, but in year 2 you're earning interest on $10,500 instead of $10,000, and that difference widens every single year after. After a decade, compound interest gives you $16,289 compared to $15,000 with simple interest, a gap of about $1,289 that doesn't feel particularly dramatic. But play it out 30 years, and compound delivers $43,219 versus only $25,000 with simple, a gap that ballooned to over $18,000. Year 10's compound interest payment came in at about $791, while by year 30, that same original $10,000 was throwing off over $2,000 a year in interest. That accelerating gap captures the entire reason compound interest matters. It's not a straight line, it's a curve that bends upward, and the longer it runs, the steeper it bends. A question that comes up a lot is whether it matters how often your interest compounds, daily versus monthly versus annually. The answer is yes, but probably less than you'd expect. Take $10,000 at 5% for 10 years. Compounded annually, once a year, you end up with $16,289. Switch to monthly compounding and you get $16,470, an extra $181. Daily compounding lands you at $16,487, only $16 more than monthly. And if you could compound continuously, every fraction of every second, your total reaches $16,487.21, which is 56 cents more than daily. The jump from annual to monthly compounding made a real difference, but going from monthly to daily added almost nothing, and going from daily to continuous added literal pocket change. A mathematical ceiling explains why. In 1683, the Swiss mathematician Jacob Bernoulli discovered that compounding more and more frequently doesn't make the result grow forever. Instead, it approaches a specific limit built around the number e, approximately 2.71828, and no amount of additional compounding frequency can push past it. The practical takeaway here is clear. The difference between monthly and daily compounding on a savings account barely registers. What drives the outcome is the interest rate and the amount of time, and compounding frequency is a rounding error compared to those two factors. Everything covered so far shows compound interest working in your favor, but now let's flip it around, because this same force works against millions of people every single day through credit card debt. 22.3% is the average credit card interest rate for accounts that actually carry a balance according to Federal Reserve data from late 2025, the highest rate in the entire history of their tracking series. What most people don't realize is that credit cards compound daily. Your annual rate gets divided by 365 to create a daily rate, and interest accrues on your balance every single day, including on yesterday's interest. At 22% APR, that daily compounding pushes the effective annual rate up to 24.6%. That means you're paying 2.5 percentage points more than the number printed on your statement, all because of how compounding works behind the scenes. Let's make this concrete with a $5,000 balance at 22% APR, where you're paying a fixed $100 a month. Your first month, $91.67 of that $100 payment covers interest, and only $8.33 touches your actual balance. Over 91% of the payment just feeds the interest. At $100 a month, paying off that $5,000 takes 137 months, which works out to 11 years and 5 months. Total paid by the end comes to approximately $13,679, meaning you handed over more than $8,600 in interest on a $5,000 balance. That's nearly 274% of what you originally owed. Double that payment to $200 a month, and the picture changes completely. Same balance, same rate, but now it takes only 34 months, under 3 years, and you pay about $6,740 total. Doubling the payment saves almost $7,000 in interest because you gave compound interest less time to work against you. This is the minimum payment trap in action. After the Card Act of 2009, most credit cards set minimum payments at the greater of 1 to 2% of the balance or a flat $25 to $40. At 22% APR, the monthly interest rate runs at 1.83%, almost as high as the 2% minimum payment itself. You're barely outrunning interest each month, and the balance drips down while interest keeps compounding on what remains. Total U.S. credit card debt hit $1.277 trillion in the fourth quarter of 2025, the highest since tracking began. The average household carrying a balance owes roughly $11,400. A financial analysis found that at typical minimum payments and rates, that average balance would take about 22 years to pay off, generating approximately $18,500 in interest along the way. Same math, same snowball, opposite direction. Federal student loans work a little differently because they technically use simple daily interest rather than compound interest. But there's a catch. When unpaid interest gets added to your principal through a process called capitalization, which happens after deferment, forbearance, or when you enter repayment, you start paying interest on a larger balance, creating a compound-like effect even though the underlying formula is technically simple. Current federal undergraduate loan rates sit at 6.39% for the 2025 to 2026 school year, which means a $30,000 loan accrues about $5.25 per day. 12 months of forbearance lets roughly $1,900 in interest capitalize, bumping your daily accrual up to $5.59. That 34 cents a day difference compounds quietly over the entire life of the loan. At this point, you might be thinking that 7% sounds great, but you want to know whether the stock market actually delivers that kind of return over real-time periods. The data answers clearly. A finance professor maintains what's considered the gold standard data set for historical market returns, and his numbers show the S&P 500 returning an arithmetic average of roughly 11.8% per year in nominal terms from 1928 through 2024. The geometric average, which reflects what investors actually experience, lands closer to 9.8 to 10.2% per year before inflation. After adjusting for inflation, the long-run real return comes out to roughly 6.5 to 7.5%, depending on the exact time period measured, and that's where the commonly cited 7% figure comes from. What that average hides is how wild individual years can be. The stock market does not return 7% every year, not even close. Out of 97 years in the dataset, only about 5 actually returned between 8 and 12%, anywhere near the supposed average. Returns above 20% happened about a third of the time, and 26 of those 97 years finished negative. The best year on record was 1954 at over 52%, and the worst was 1931 at negative 43%, with a standard deviation of roughly 20%, producing an enormous range of normal outcomes. But over long periods, those wild swings average out, and the longer you stay invested, the more the math converges toward that historical average. That's not a guarantee, but it's what a century of data shows. One more number puts this in perspective. According to investment research using market data, $10,000 invested in the S&P 500 in 1960 grew to $6.4 million by 2025 with dividends reinvested. Without reinvesting dividends, that same $10,000 grew to only $982,000, which is 6.5 times less. Reinvesting, letting your returns compound, accounted for the vast majority of the wealth created. Compounding goes far beyond interest on a savings account. Every dollar of growth generates its own growth, and that process never stops accelerating. Compound interest isn't some modern financial invention. Its roots reach back to the very beginning of recorded civilization. The earliest evidence comes from approximately 2400 BCE in Sumer, modern-day southern Iraq, where clay tablets document barley loans carrying interest rates of 33.33% per year, with interest compounding on unpaid balances. A professor explains that compound interest was originally connected to the natural reproduction of livestock herds. Lending someone cattle naturally implied expecting more animals returned, since each generation produces its own offspring, which means compounding was modeled on biology before anyone ever modeled it on money. By 1753 BCE, the Code of Hammurabi was capping interest rates at 20% for silver and 33% for grain, and lenders who charged more forfeited the entire principal. 4,000 years ago, people already understood that compound interest left unchecked could become destructive. Benjamin Franklin understood this force as well as anyone. In 1790, his will left about $4,400 each to the cities of Boston and Philadelphia, with instructions to invest the money and let it compound for 200 years. By 1990, those two trusts held a combined $6.5 million. Perfect 5% compounding would have produced about $77 million, but withdrawals, management issues, and loan defaults ate into the returns along the way. Even imperfect compounding turned $4,400 into $6.5 million over 2 centuries. Franklin put the concept in plain terms. Money makes money, and the money that money makes money. You've probably heard the quote attributed to Einstein that compound interest is the 8th wonder of the world. Great line. Researchers have found no evidence Einstein ever actually said it, and the quote first appeared in print decades after his death. But the idea behind it holds up, and every number in this video confirms it. Here's what to take away from all of this. If you're in your 20s and you start putting away $300 a month right now, you could retire with close to $800,000, even if you never increase that amount. 82% of that final balance would be interest you never contributed, which means your money did the work for you. If you're in your 30s, you haven't missed the window. 3 decades of compounding still lie ahead, and $300 a month still gets you to $366,000, with 70% being pure interest, which is still a powerful outcome. And if you're in your 40s or 50s, the math still bends in your favor. Every dollar just carries more weight because there's less time for compounding to do its thing, but it still does its thing. The flip side of this equation matters just as much. Carrying credit card debt at 22% means that same compounding force is working against you every single day. And paying that down isn't just saving money, it's shutting down a machine that's actively taking money from your future. The core idea is almost embarrassingly simple. Time is the most powerful variable in the compound interest formula, not the rate and not the amount. Time. And time is the one thing you can never get back. The best time to start was yesterday, and the second best time is right now. If you want to know where to actually put that money, like index funds, retirement accounts, the specific vehicles that make this math work in the real world, I've got videos covering all of those, and links are in the description. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.